And that was sort of a
Yeah.
gateway to like, maybe this movie isn't as good as people think it is.
Yeah, I do think it's massively overrated. But like you just said, I also love the Heath Ledger performance as the Joker. And the way the character's written is the most interesting aspect of the movie as well. I mean, I'm writing a book on film studies at the moment. God, I've been writing it for ages, but I've got a chapter that I want to do, which is all about a different type of hero that exists in movies, which is where the villain defies the surface narrative. And Heath Ledger's Joker does that. You know, Batman's got his big victim save the city narrative, and Joker comes along and is like, I'm just going to laugh at that narrative and spit in its face, and I'm going to cause chaos. And he is out to destroy the surface narrative of the movie, basically. He's destroying everybody's narratives. And I think a lot of people actually view him as a hero because of his defiance of bullshit narratives. I would say, if anything, that's probably the central appeal of that movie. And it's an appeal that holds for me as well. And I did make a list somewhere of other movie characters who do similar things. I try to think of some examples off the top of my head. Oh yeah, a very pretentiously written hero movie was Robin Hood, Prince of Thieves with Kevin Costner. Did you ever see that one? It was an old 1990s film.
Of course, yeah.
Have you seen it? Yeah.
Everything I do,
Well, you
I
know,
do it for you. Yeah, of course.
oh, well, you know who I'm talking about. Alan Rickman is the bad guy in that. He's the hero. A lot of people enjoyed that film, and I went to watch it, and everyone loved his scenes, Alan Rickman's scenes, because his character was defying the bullshit conventional narrative and was just like throwing it all in different new directions. Yeah, and I think there's a lot of villains in cinema who do this thing where they destroy the narrative. They might get killed at the end of the film, but along the way they pretty much destroy the narrative. And I think the audience unconsciously view them as a role model, a hero. And I think Hannibal Lecter has got an element of that in Silence of the Lambs as well, but done in a less comical way, because this is one of my favorite scenes in the history of cinema, is when he's in the cage in the middle of the room and he's got like this godlike light shining down on him. And he's questioning her about this experience as a kid where she was trying to save the lambs and she couldn't do it. So she's haunted by that memory. And now she wants to save poor Catherine from the serial killer so that she will be relieved of this unconscious pain of this childhood memory. And that is really powerful, because it's like, how much does she really care about this victim of this serial killer? Is it that she cares, or is it just she just wants to relieve herself of that memory? She wants to push that memory back into the unconscious. So she feels that she has to save this girl for that reason. And Lecter sees through that, and he's like, nah. And he tears apart the surface narrative that all these cops, they're all just out there to save victims from serial killers and all, FBI agents and all that. They're all there to be the hero who does the right thing and saves the victim. But reality isn't quite like that, because a lot of them, they're there making money. If they weren't getting paid, they wouldn't be there. Some of them are there because they enjoy the prestige of being seen as the hero who saves people from serial killers or who catches them, or the prestige of being the person who psychologically broke down what was going on with the serial killer and figured them out and stuff like that. There's a lot of selfishness in that area. You look at like psychologists who do studies of psychopaths and stuff like that, and you read their stuff. A lot of the time, those psychologists are incredibly egotistical, and you realize this isn't even about the serial killers. This is about themselves, you know. And I mean, I get people saying this to me. It's like, oh, you're just doing these film studies to show how smart you are. You could make that argument. And, you know, I'm not going to deny it. That's probably a motive of mine. Everybody's got this selfish element where we do things in the world which we say are for the good of other people. And some of it is, of course. I don't think people are completely selfish. But I think almost all of the time when people do good deeds, there is a selfish element to it where they want to be seen to be doing the good deed. And the people who go out and do the good deeds where they're not going to be receiving recognition for it, those are the people who I go, oh, wow, okay, you actually had nothing to gain from this personally, but you went out and did this good stuff anyway. To me, those are like real heroes, you know. Yeah, so no idea how I got off on
Yeah.
that tangent. Oh yeah, it was the Hannibal Lecter tearing apart that narrative, you know, and Hannibal Lecter's actually got a very wicked sense of humor as well. He's always mocking everybody around him, and the psychiatrist he hates, the psychiatrist who's got him in prison. He is an example of the self-centered psychiatrist who doesn't really care. He's just in it for the prestige, and Lecter sees it a mile away and hates the guy. And it's implied that he kills that guy at the end of the film and stuff. Yeah. So yeah, I love these heroes in villains' clothing. You could call it that. Yeah.
You touched on touched on something a little bit earlier, and I was thinking about this. Like, there's a way in which I think you were talking about Clockwork Orange, how Clockwork Orange is a violent movie, but you don't feel like it's as violent as some films today. And I actually agree with you. And that got me thinking that there's a way in which movies of the past, you know, like whether it be The Godfather is the one that's coming to mind right now. Like that's a violent movie, and there's all kinds of adult themes, but I don't walk away from having seen classic films of the 70s and 80s feeling gross. Like, there's a way in which the films are presented with such skill that I'm able to like watch what's going on and feel troubled or disturbed or appropriately moved by it, but I don't walk away feeling like, oh, I need to take a shower. But there's a way in which films today, they are not as skillfully made in a way, because I watch them and I walk away feeling like, oh, I wish I had never seen that. And what do you think has happened to movies over the past maybe 20 or 30 years where that change has come across? Or is that something that you've noticed as well?
Oh yeah, definitely. I've noticed it, and I'm not too keen on it. I've had a lot of debates with this about this subject with people on Facebook and stuff. I've got like a Facebook group on film studies and stuff, and I've had a lot of debates with people on there about it, and I've discussed it with other people about certain horror movies. I mean, the 1970s and 80s, clearly the level of violence in movies massively increased from what it was in the 1950s and 60s, and you know, there are scenes from films in that era which I still look back at and I'm thinking, you might have gone a bit too far there. I still think the Exorcist crucifix masturbation scene, both morally and in terms of the violence on screen, I think that was, I like the film. I've done studies on it, but I think that went a little bit too far. I remember when I was a kid, I wasn't too disturbed by it myself because I read the novel when I was like 9 and then I saw the movie. So I was prepared for it. But I know that other kids and the teens and stuff who saw it were deeply, deeply disturbed by that scene, and tears, you know. And I think they went a bit far with that one in The Exorcist. But overall, the movie is still incredibly powerful. And there's some other examples of extreme violence and gore, but somehow it didn't really go too far in most examples. I mean, two examples that I find interesting is like both John Carpenter's The Thing and Hellraiser are both incredibly gory on a physical, visceral level, but somehow they're not really too sickening. At least I don't find that they are. I know some people have been, critics were quite disturbed by The Thing when it came out, and it showed in their negative reviews. But I think like with The Thing, because it was a surrealistic monster changing shape, the level of gore didn't feel real. It just felt like bizarre. You know, it felt like something out of a dream or a nightmare. It didn't feel like you were watching real violence, even though it looked amazing on screen. And then with Clive Barker's Hellraiser, extremely violent, but it's all done in a magical framing. You know, you've got like magical hooks flying out on chains and pulling people's body apart and stuff like that. But this is stuff that would never happen in reality. So there's a disconnect by the fact that it's magical. I think Hellraiser is very clever on that level. I know a lot of people are still grossed out by it anyway. But where I think things started to change there was as the quality of movies started to decline. I would say in the 1990s, there was still a lot of good stuff made in the 90s, but the downhill slope had started there. And the movie industry seemed unable to match the great horror films of the 1970s and 80s, because they had the special effects there that were practical and looked real and all that. And they had the amazing scripts to go with it and stuff like that. And then in the 1990s, it seems like filmmakers were running out of ideas, interesting psychological ideas of how to make a horror movie. And so I think they've started resorting to the gross out torture type stuff. And like the first Saw movie was all about, here's a load of different ways that a person can be tortured to death. And I know it's got a lot of fans, and I've had good friends from over the years who told me that this is like their favorite movie or one of their favorite movies. And you mentioned it earlier that it was one of your favorite movies, is Seven. Seven
Wow.
never really did it for me. I think Finch is a good director. I think he directs the film quite well. But to me, the film was just a showcase of nastiness. It doesn't show most of it on screen, but it's just like, oh my God, someone got tortured to death in this way. And then you got the Saw 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. And you had all the Hellraiser movies that came after that never had the psychological magic of the first film. And there just seemed to be this market emerging of these sadistic movies. Although we did have that in the 1970s and 80s with the video nasties, as they're called. But because there was great horror movies coming out, those video nasty movies just got shoved aside and forgotten because they were trash. But nowadays, we don't really have many great horror movies that are outshining the stupid sadistic ones. And instead, we seem to be getting a combination of the base level sadistic nastiness and immaturity of the video nasties from the 1970s and 80s. Those are being redone now, but they're being done with higher budgets to make them look slick like proper Hollywood productions. But conceptually, they're no better than those old stupid video nasties. The one exception among those video nasties that I think is a work of art is Texas Chainsaw Massacre. There's a ton of depth to that film. Especially to do with animal rights and stuff like that. It's a powerful movie, and it's not nearly as gory as those other video nasties. And so now we've got this thing where, like where you had with heavy metal in the 1990s, each band is trying to play heavier and heavier and heavier than the other until it becomes so heavy it's just like, oh God, I'm bored, and it's like it can't get any heavier. And it's like, okay, is someone going to come along and actually make some well-composed music now, And that seems to be going on with the films. So you've got the Saw movies and stuff like that, and the Terrifier movies that have come out, which are like a next-level sadisticness that have got virtually nothing interesting going on conceptually. But because there's an absence of really, really good psychological horror movies, it's like a lot of people are just lapping up these sadistic movies because they don't know what the hell else to watch. Hereditary that came out in 2018, for me, that was a rare example, a modern example of a horror movie that was really, really deep. What was the one from 2012 with it was an Australian movie about a woman and her kid, The Babadook. Did you ever see The Babadook horror film? I think that was 2012. That's a good
No, I'm not a
psychological
big horror fan.
No. Well, The Babadook is not gory, deeply psychological, very well made. Hereditary as well from 2018. But those are such rare examples in horror. But yeah, just this in-your-face black gore. We're going to show you new ways of being sadistic to people. That's what it's become. And how far do we let it go? Because I'm not one for censorship generally. I don't like it generally. But I know from the books that I've read on real serial killer cases and some of the people I worked with, when I worked in mental health, I worked with paedophiles and stuff like that. And I read some of their case files and I knew some of the stuff that went on there. I'm like, are we going to let these movies just carry on in those directions? And even the trailer for Terrifier 3 showed a kid going down to open his Christmas presents, and then you see the villain there with an axe ready to chop the kid up. And that is the central appeal of the trailer. Hey, watch this movie and you might see a kid being axed to death, And it's really, really pathetic, because I know how much further it can go based upon the real cases. I mean, I won't go into any details here about the stuff that I've come across over the years in studying real cases, but there's real stuff that's gone on that's way worse than even in the Terrifier movies. And I don't ever want to see anybody put that stuff on screen. But I'm not seeing the critics calling out these filmmakers and saying, why are you increasing the levels of sadism year by year? When is it going to stop? And when is it going to become illegal to show these levels of sadism? Yeah. Oh, dark and cynical. But yeah, that's,
Yeah.
yeah.
No, I appreciate you saying that, because I think of the It movies, which is essentially about, a killer alien from outer space who eats children, right? Thanks Stephen King for that. And I think about the movie, the American version of The Girl with the Dragon Tattoo, where you go down into the torture basement, of a otherwise seemingly normal guy, and just the increasing. What I liked about Seven wasn't the torture aspect of it. I actually found a lot of that stuff really disturbing, but I appreciate it. It posed the question to the audience at the end, like, how would you handle this situation, right? Like, is there a place for vengeance? Like, I appreciated the question of that paradox. I don't think I could watch the movie now, but at least it raised an interesting thought. Like, how do you handle this situation? Like, what is the objectively right thing to do here, right? Do you give the guy what he wants, or do you not? How do you navigate that? But I think you point out something very real, like the increasing sadism, which seems to be like it's pornographic in nature. It's meant for spectacle as opposed to sending any deeper message. Please go ahead.
Yeah, well, I mentioned much earlier on, we were talking about humiliation combined with violence in movies. And that's something we've started to see in some of these sadistic movies as well, is not only are we going to see people tortured to death in really horrific ways, but it's going to be presented as if it's funny and enjoyable. And I've had arguments with people about these Terrifier films where they've made the argument that, oh, no, it's just presented as being funny. And I'm like, what's funny about that? I mean, you could go back to, like in the 1980s, people used to watch the Friday the 13th movies, and I enjoyed them as well. They weren't intelligent. But there was an interesting psychology to those movies that I've always wanted to explore since. Somehow the Friday the 13th movies were different to what we're getting now. They had gore, they had little bits of sadism, but it wasn't about the sadism so much. And a lot of the deaths were funny. And I remember I used to watch Friday the 13th movies in my teens with my friends, and when I was a kid as well. And we used to laugh at the deaths. But I think part of why we were laughing at the deaths is because the special effects were a bit crap a lot of the time. And the level of sadism wasn't over the top. Somehow it was different to what we're getting now. And not that I'm not saying that the Friday the 13th movies are great art or anything like that,
Right.
But yeah, I don't know what's going to happen with this increasing level of sadism thing. I think sooner or later, some filmmaker is going to come along and make something that is so sick that it causes a huge backlash. Sometimes that does happen in movies, and I suppose it has happened in the respect that some of these really horrible movies have been utter commercial failures because of the depravity that they've gone to. So I guess a lot of them pay the price. But I am finding it interesting that audiences seem to be getting more and more interested in watching higher levels of sadism in movies. It's not just the filmmakers. I mean, they're responding to an audience desire. And maybe that all ties back in with what we were talking about earlier about the victimhood mentality and the wanting to have angry, vengeful heroes. Maybe this is an extension of that, where the sadistic villain in a horror movie is like a hero. And I guess that's always existed to an extent with horror movies. I mean, Freddy Krueger, he's an interesting one, isn't he? A kind of sadistic, but people get posters of him like he's a hero, stuff like that. And it's just a very interesting aspect of audience psyche, how they love the heroes. But yeah, I mean, I don't know. There seems to be a lot of anger in society, a lot of sense of victimhood, and we're seeing it playing out in movies and in politics. It's like everybody wants to be seen as the victim group so that they can so that they can be entitled. It's funny because you got like one group that says, we don't like that group over there because they are entitled and they've victimized us. So now we're the victims and now we're the entitled ones. They weren't pissed off about them being entitled. They just wanted to have that entitlement for themselves. And I'm seeing a lot of that going on. So you're getting these groups that criticize another group for being nasty to everybody. They claim they're the victim and then they're brutal to that group and then they become the nasty ones. There's loads of that going on. And I don't know if it's being encouraged on purpose. I don't know if it's just part of some bizarre psychological trend. And then different groups are all competing with each other to be who can be the angriest victim and therefore the most entitled to privileges. There's loads of that going on in the politics and stuff. And I think that crosses over with the enthusiasm for anger from our movie heroes and movie villains.